Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is very vast for those who come to Him with purity of tawheed. And He said, "La tubashshirhum fayattakilu." He said, don't tell them, because the majority of them will become lackadaisical in their striving for Allah's forgiveness. Many of them will rely on this and ignore a lot of other things that ignore the rest of their full potential. So here, the Prophet ﷺ is choosing who to tell certain levels of knowledge. He told Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Why did he tell Mu'adh? Because Mu'adh can understand it properly. Mu'adh can put it in its proper context. Most people cannot. Most people distinguish and separate between the Tawheed of Allah and the fulfillment of that covenant and Tawheed. Most people, they distinguish the two. When in fact, the people of knowledge know that pure Tawheed is only by way of fulfillment of the covenant. That when I obey the Prophet ﷺ in little things, even when I stay away from things that are not necessarily haram, but things that are discouraged, right? That is part of Tawheed. That is part of that same narration. This is the meaning of the narration. But many people don't make that distinction. They think, well, I have Tawheed here. I don't have to worry about all the other details, right? And those details are really the embodiment of the fulfillment of Tawheed. Another example, the Prophet ﷺ told Abu Hurairah once, he was in a gathering, he told Abu Hurairah, he said, go to the people and inform them, and the message was the same, that if you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not having associated partners unto Him, you will be entered into paradise. It will happen. It is inevitable. And so Abu Hurairah said, give me something of yours that when I come to the people, they'll believe me, that you sent me. They won't doubt it. So he gave him his shoes. And this narration in Sahih Muslim in the book of Imam is known as the narration of the shoes, right? He gave him his shoes. Everybody recognizes his shoes. Take my 2 shoes and tell them I sent you to tell them this. Well, when he was on his way, the first person to meet him was who? Umar ibn al-Khattab. He said, where are you going? You got these shoes, where are you headed? So he said, the Prophet ﷺ told me to do such and such. Umar punched him in the chest. He punched him so hard that the guy fell down on his behind and started getting ready to cry. And so he said, go back, right? And so Abu Hurairah ran back, and now Umar is behind him. Abu Hurairah reaches the Prophet ﷺ first. He's in sorts. He's out of sorts. He said, what's the matter with you? He said, Umar did this, and he's coming right behind me. And so Umar came in, and he said, did you really send him for this and this? He said, yes. He said, don't do it. Most people won't understand that, and their excellence will be dulled by such knowledge. It won't benefit them. And so Umar radiallahu anhu said to Abu Hurairah, "Fatrukum." Okay, leave them as they are, right? There's a plethora of narrations like this. As a matter of fact, we don't usually distinguish in the science of hadith and in the science of usul al-fiqh. It is a mistake to distinguish between the narration and the narrator. The narration and the narrator. And the school of thought which most prominently and most pronounced in their practice of this principle is the Hanafi school of thought. That look, whenever we look at a narration, we look at the narrator because that gives us some kind of context or timeline, right? If it's Abu Hurairah narrates a narration, well, Abu Hurairah became Muslim close to the year 6 after Hijrah. This means that this narration was in the later years. However, right, so it gives us context. And that's why in all books, even in simplified books like Riyadh al-Salihin, for instance, you'll find that it's not just narrations. right? It's not just Bukhari narrates that the Prophet said, right? And just narrations. No, no, no. It's always with what the scholars for 1,400 years have made it their duty that if they don't mention the entirety of the chain of narration, they will at least mention the companion, the narrator who narrates the narration. Because if you're well acquainted with those companions, it will increase your understanding and help you to give context and time, spatial, temporal awareness of when this narration was said, what context it was, what era it was, etc. This is very important. And so, what happened? Well, the publishing of books, the printing press came along. Many of us, we make these inventions as human beings, and these inventions were not necessarily made by Muslims, right? But the West, during the Industrial Revolution, they came up with all these inventions, and they started to design things that for them was great, was fantastic. But we never stopped to think, should we be doing this? Should we design this? Is this something that needs to be invented, right? We're always fixated on, can we invent it? Is it something we can do? We never stop to think, is this something that we should do? Now, today, we look and we say, hey, books are great. I'd love to see my kids reading a book. As a matter of fact, we look at reading as being kind of a lost art almost now with the advent of modern technology. However, don't be so quick, because originally when the printing press was introduced to the Muslim world, the scholars of Islam strictly, categorically, and unequivocally prohibited that anything be published via the printing press from Islamic literature, except for books of poetry and some books of history. Books of fiqh, books of hadith, the mushaf, these were never allowed to be published in a printing press. You say, why is it? We want everybody to access it. No, because when we just publish books and release these books to the world, it's like we take out the doctor from the equation of the pharmacy. Now we don't have a doctor prescribing things. Now we just have the patients going directly into the pharmacy and swallowing every pill they come across. Second of all, when we publish things en masse in this way, we cannot meticulously certify that these things are pure, that nothing has been changed, that nothing has been altered, etc. It's hard to have an overwatch and oversight on these things. But as usual, people don't listen, right? And the big businessmen, they say, oh, if we publish books, this will be great. We could take Sahih al-Bukhari, print it, publish it. It used to be that if you wanted Sahih al-Bukhari, let's say you wanted a copy of Sahih al-Bukhari, you would go to the main library. The library has students of knowledge and scholars that are all there, and you would find one that is known for his very nice handwriting and, he's quick or whatever. They have different features, and you would pay him, and you'd say, I would like a copy of Sahih al-Bukhari. Now that man has already written Sahih al-Bukhari 1,000 times before, right? He's made those copies with his hand. He knows Sahih al-Bukhari letter by letter. And so you pay him, and he says, okay, come back in 6 months, and you'll get your book. And so you come back in 6 months, and here is Sahih al-Bukhari. How did he do it? He takes the hard copy, and he writes it out for you, and then you take it. That is how it worked. We didn't need to change that. That's how it needed to be. Because if someone comes looking for certain books that they're not ready for, they won't be able to have access to them. You have to go to the pharmacy through the doctor. You have to go to the scholars. They're the ones that tell you what you need to know and what you don't need to know at this time. But we learned from this idea that no, the public has a right to know everything all at once, no matter if they're ready for it or not. And this is strictly prohibited in the Quran, and it's strictly prohibited in the Sunnah, that everything be told to everyone all at once. People need to be taught slowly. I don't learn how to ride a bike by buying a big, soft-tail Harley Davidson and jumping on it and say, I'm learning how to ride a bike. That is a disaster waiting to happen. You take baby steps slowly, and you have someone teach you and pass this knowledge down. So what happened slowly over time, even though the fatwa of the scholars was to not print these things, continue to always get your books from the scholars, certain publishers didn't listen. So they started to print them. So slowly over time, this became commonplace. Now what happened? Every single person can overnight have a 1,000-volume library, and they can just dive in and read all kinds of stuff. What comes from this? It comes from this fake scholars that don't have a lineage. We get unfounded knowledge, innovation, misconceptions, misunderstandings, and the scholars always said, لا تأخذ العلم عن صحفي ولا تأخذ القرآن عن مصحفي. They would all say, never take knowledge from a person who learned only by their books, and never take the recitation of the Quran from someone who only learned it from the Mus'haf. This is not an acceptable teacher. Teachers have a lineage in Islam. They have to take it from people who took it all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you go to the doctor and you say, yes, Sheikh, I want to learn. What do you want to learn? I would like to learn the science of fiqh. I would like to learn the science of hadith. He will prescribe to you, and you will come and you will visit with him continuously, and you will learn, and he will take you on that journey together. It's never a detached journey. The Quran and Sunnah and all the sciences that came thereforth, they are not a newspaper that you can just skim through and everyone will understand it. Yes, Islam is for everyone. But as our teachers would tell us often, adult food is poison to infants. Right? Adult food is poison to infants. When the advent of translating came, forget about it. The confusion is overwhelming now. Now we just take books like, I've seen Musnad al-Imam Ahmed translated and published. You could go buy it right now. I studied with my teachers the science of hadith for almost 10 years. I never owned a copy of Musnad al-Imam Ahmed myself until very, very far into the future. This is an incredibly advanced book, and a person who does not already have it usually doesn't have business getting it, right? Not that it's bad, it's a collection of the Prophet's narrations. But again, medicine isn't bad, it just needs to be distributed properly. We will continue with this, inshallah, tomorrow. Wallahu a'lam, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa jazakum Allahu khayran. Just a reminder, Maghrib is 5:50. It jumped ahead 10 minutes. It was 5:40. That's the only salah that's changing this week. Now.